Frenum piercings, pros, cons, advantages, disadvantages. Going to give you 5 of each, along with what you should know beforehand, getting the piercing, healing the piercing, jewelry, living with the piercing, and what happens if you decide you don't like it and want to take it out. Coming up next on Pros and Cons by Piercer, Season 2, Episode number 26. So you might just want to stick around. For those who are new to the channel, first off, welcome to the channel. Hope you're enjoying the videos, hoping you're finding them edifying, etc. But you may not quite know who I am or why you should listen to anything I have to say. My name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer and have been since 1994. I own and I operate the Axiom Body Piercing Studio, located right here in Des Moines, Iowa, inside Skin Kitchen Tattoo. So, when I talk to you about these things, I'm talking to a level of expertise that comes from me in the body piercing industry for well over 27 years. So today I'm going to talk about what is called the Frenum piercing. It is a male genital piercing. If you are easily offended, don't want to learn about male genital piercings, or are not of a proper age to be listening to this, please find something else to watch. We have plenty of videos that cover body art, either tattooing or piercing, that have absolutely nothing to do with genital piercing. If you think somehow this is going to be sexually stimulating, you're going to be highly disappointed. The purpose of this video is solely educational. For those that are thinking about getting the piercing done, or maybe their partner, or anybody who's generally curious about genital piercings, especially male ones. With that out of the way, let's talk about what piercing we're exactly talking about today. What we're talking about is a Frenum piercing, and they are located usually, traditionally, on the underside of the penis. Basically, that loose tissue is what it goes through of the shaft, generally right below the glans. However, they can be done pretty much anywhere along the shaft, either on the top or the bottom. Doesn't really matter as long as you have the anatomy for it. It's important because a lot of people think that this piercing somehow goes all the way through. It doesn't. It's just on the surface. It does not actually go into any part of the penis. It's that separate loose skin that it actually goes through. Now, they can be done in multiple settings, often referred to as a Jacob's ladder. Usually any more than 3 is considered a ladder. The other thing is the more traditional Frenum, which is done on someone who is uncircumcised. It is named after that Frenulum tendon that actually holds the, or kind of adds pressure to, or snaps back the foreskin into place. It is traditionally was done underneath that inside of the foreskin, just through that tissue, just underneath the tendon. I've done them. They're pretty common, I guess, to a degree. Being in the United States, it's kind of unusual for people not to be cut, but it is possible, and it's usually done with a ring. The other ones are always done with barbells and should be done with barbells. Now, as far as the history, the earliest reference to this history is in a book, which I'm going to mispronounce, but here we go. You ready? It's Zeirshrift Fur Ethnologie, I believe is how it's pronounced, which stated amongst the Timorese of Indonesia, the frenum or frenulum below the gland of the penis is pierced with a brass ring. This functions as if the ring is going to be enhanced stimulation during sex. So this dates back to some tribal cultures, some indigenous people in Indonesia. The modern version of it pretty much comes from the Gay BDSM subculture. It was commonly practiced. I don't know how much documentation there would be out there, but when it comes to modern piercing, it was developed in the late 70s, early 80s at places like Gauntlet, and has become pretty much a staple of the body piercing industry ever since. It is probably the second most common piercing of the male genital, right behind Prince Albert piercings. With that out of the way, let's go on to the pros, the advantages, the things we like about this piercing, the things that make you say, hey, I want to get this. Number one, this piercing has a tendency to enhance sexual pleasure. Now, with anything that has to do with piercings and sexual manipulation or improvement, it varies. And how much of it is just the thought of having the piercing and how much of it is the actual piercing is always up for debate. The thing I will tell you is that most of my clients have said that it does feel good. Their partners seem to like it. So it's one of those piercings that's supposed to enhance your sexual pleasure. Keep in mind, if you're not good at what you do before you get the piercing, you still won't be good at what you do after you get the piercing. Number two, this piercing has a long history of healing fairly easily and without complication. It's also a fairly quick heal, ranging anywhere from roughly 8 to 12 weeks to get through that initial healing process. Number three, it can be done in a number of different placements. Like I mentioned earlier, it can be done on the top of the shaft, the bottom, the sides, etc. It also can be done in groupings known as Jacob's ladders. I've had clients that we've done 5 or 6 on the top, 5 or 6 on the bottom, and even a couple on the sides that kind of intertwined. That's extreme. That's not common, but it is possible. It all depends on the amount of real estate we have to work with, depending on your anatomy. Number 4, this piercing tends to not be very painful. The forceps, a little bit uncomfortable, kind of pinch a little bit. The piercing itself is very slight, very quick. Like most genital piercings, it's kind of a very intense, oh my God, that hurts, and then over. You don't have the throbbing and aching that you have with other piercings. Number 5, this piercing is easy to conceal. It is a piercing that you could have, and unless you're either intimate with the person or show them or tell them, they will not know that you have it. So it's a piercing if you work in a profession or in a social circle or a situation where piercings are frowned upon, you don't have to worry about it. You can easily have this piercing, and no one will ever know that you have it. Before we move on to the cons, the disadvantages, things we don't like, just kind of a little bit of a reminder, if you find the video helpful, edifying, you're enjoying it, finding it entertaining, give us a thumbs up. Let us know that you liked it, because we like it when you like it. If you haven't subscribed, well, why the hell not? Hit that subscription and tap on that notification bell so you're notified every single time we post something. With that out of the way, let's move on to the cons, the disadvantages, the things we hate, the things that make us go, no, I can't get this, the things that make you go, yeah, maybe if I think about it a little bit more. Number 1, no sexual contact without a latex barrier for a minimum of 6 months. This piercing is an open wound. Even if you've been with a partner for 25 years, you're all tested, you know nobody's got anything, you still need to practice safe sex for that first 6 months. Mainly because that piercing needs time to heal, and it also needs time to season, meaning thicken, that tissue to thicken to the point where it's not as acceptable to tears. Number 2, you are more prone to STDs, meaning that if you switch partners, regardless of how long you've had the piercing, you do want to practice safe sex until you've both been tested properly. In other words, you really need to do it the same way you're supposed to do it. Also, another thing is even years afterwards, these piercings can be damaged, so it's always a good idea to practice safe sex. Number 3, loose ends. Because usually these piercings are done with barbells, those barbells can come unscrewed. They do need to be checked on a regular basis, even after the piercing is healed. You do want to buy quality jewelry that is internally threaded, that takes a number of turns to tighten and loosen, just to be on the safe side. Even with all that, it's my experience that if you don't pay attention, they loosen on their own. You sit down to use the facilities, and you hear a clink. Or you're walking through somewhere, and it rolls across the floor. So you do need to check those. They can come unscrewed. Just one more thing you have to worry about. Number 4, your partner may absolutely hate this piercing. They may not like the way it feels, the way it looks, or even the idea of it. meaning that if you're going to be intimate with them, you may have to remove the jewelry. And the last one, number 5, this piercing can bleed anywhere from 1 to 6 days. Usually, it's not a bad idea to wear a pad during that period of time. Once it goes through that initial healing period, it won't happen very often unless you really cause some damage, but it is a factor during the initial healing period. Before moving on to things you should consider before getting it done or things you should know, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. We have various different t-shirts, designs, etc., various different products. Link is in the description. There's also one of those merch bars down below. Now let's get into things you should look for or know beforehand. The first thing is you need to find a confident, well-experienced piercer that is knowledgeable about this piercing, has a lot of experience doing it, makes you feel comfortable, gives you a consultation that discusses things like the risks involved, what it's going to take to heal it, etc. They should also, if during the consultation, maybe take a look at your anatomy and see whether or not you're a good candidate or not. Usually with this piercing, most people are. I'd say 99.99 are, but there is those possibilities that maybe you aren't. They should suggest the correct jewelry, which in this case should be 12 gauge or thicker. Either a standard barbell, straight, not curved, not circular. If you're going along the shaft, if you're doing it inside or under the foreskin, generally what they're done with is either a curved barbell or a ring. They just kind of sit in there a little bit easier, and because we're not going through as much tissue, they're not as wide. Understand, this piercing is probably or possibly going to bleed up to 6 to 7 days in some cases. It really varies from person to person. So it's a good idea to understand in advance that you may have to wear a sanitary napkin. Buy them before you come in so that you have them ready, so it's one less thing you have to deal with later. Sex is probably not going to be that comfortable for the first up to about a week, week and a half. It varies from person to person. You're going to have to be gentle at first. If it hurts, try something else, but it may impede that. So it's a good idea, if you're going in to get this piercing done, have some fun time with your partner or whatever you're into beforehand so you have it kind of out of your system. Because I will tell you that having your genitals pierced tends to raise the libido and remind you over and over again that you have genitals. If you're doing a ladder, plan it out in advance. Usually I will sit down and kind of mark out what our goal end is. Usually the maximum I generally suggest doing in one sitting is 3. You start getting over that third one, the swelling starts happening, and it can really skew how the placement is on those last few you do. So it's usually best to kind of map out what you're going to do and do it in stages of 3. Lastly, does your piercer provide written and verbal aftercare instructions? Do they have a video available that maybe covers everything you need to know? And do they offer aftercare product? If they don't, where can you purchase that? In most cases, what you're going to need is sterile saline. A lot of studios do sell it, but they may not, and you may have to hunt for it, so ask in advance. Now let's move on to the piercing itself. First thing that's going to happen is you're going to have a consultation. The piercer is going to run through the basics, what it's going to take to heal it, any risks that are involved. They're going to ask you about any metal allergies and so forth. Then they're going to probably take a look at your anatomy, possibly, and then make a jewelry selection. Most commonly, these are done with 12-gauge 5/8 barbells. With some people, especially if you are a grower, you may want to explain that to your piercer and have them put in a slightly larger piece, like a 3/4, just to be on the safe side. It can be rather uncomfortable if that barbell's not long enough when you're erect. Next up will be the waiver. Now, the waiver is going to cover a lot of information, and I always suggest that you read through it. It should cover things like metal allergies, allergies to various different products they're using, any medical issues you may have, and any sensitivity you have or to anything, but also it's going to cover things like if you're under the influence of any medication, controlled or uncontrolled substance. This stuff's important. Read through it. If there's something that is not, like you're on a blood thinner or what have you, discuss that with your piercer and your doctor. Now, once that's all done, we will generally scrub up and then start the setup. Once all the equipment's set up, we'll disinfect the area, and then we'll begin to mark. Usually I'll do this with the client laying down, just basically because it's just easier to work and I can get a better view at that right there. So usually the whole thing's done from disinfecting all the way through the piercing to wrapping and ending with the person reclined or laying down. But if you are going to do multiple piercings, I would suggest mentioning that to them at the point of marking so that they can mark out, kind of plan out how much spacing is going to be needed, especially if you're doing a grouping. You don't want to end up with a situation where the first 3 are, let's say, a ½ inch apart, and you want 8 of them, and when you get done, you realize that the ones on the bottom are going to have to be like a 1/4 inch together because it's going to look odd and strange. So make sure you can evenly space them and work those out. Once that's done, this piercing, I do suggest being done with forceps, and mainly because we want to make sure that we're completely separating that outer skin away from anything that's inside it. We do not, like for example, on the underside, we do not want to puncture through the person's urethra and cause a possibility of a number of complications. With this, we just want it through that loose skin. So using the forceps opposed to doing freehand makes it easier not only to get the piercing straight and compact that tissue and make the piercing faster, but it also allows you to definitely be confident that you don't have anything in there that you shouldn't hit. Needle is very quick. Needle's inserted in and out. Usually they'll have you do a breathing exercise, at least I do. Once that's done, a guide pin is usually used to insert the jewelry. Jewelry slides in, closed up, and then some saline and maybe a little bit of pressure is applied to make sure that the bleeding stops. There might be some slight bleeding, slight to moderate bleeding initially. With this one, I just like a PA. If you saw the video about that one, generally what I'll do is have the person take a look at it. We'll hand them the hand mirror if need be. And then we will put a piece of gauze against it with some saline on it, and then peel the glove back over the penis, and then use a rubber band to attach it loosely so that they can get home without having to worry about, discoloring their clothing or staining it with blood. If you have a pad with you, just use the pad. That's simple. Now, aftermath, you might notice, like I said earlier, this piercing is kind of like an, ow, God, that hurts, and then it's done. You don't feel it at all. It will, however, be tender to the touch, certain movements, and the more you keep that piercing isolated, the less that's going to happen. You might see a little bit of bruising, but that's pretty uncommon. Occasionally, it can happen with some people if you're sensitive to that. With all of that out of the way, let's move on to healing. Average healing time on this, as I said earlier, is 8 to 12 weeks. During which time I'm going to suggest that you clean it twice daily using a sterile saline. I like Nelmed piercing aftercare, the mist style, because you can just mist the piercing, let it stay in contact, and then dab off any excess. Also, you need to practice cross-contamination prevention. That's things like cleaning your hands before you handle it, no oral contact or exchanging of bodily fluids on, near, around the piercing for a minimum of 6 months. That doesn't mean you can't have sex for 6 months. That just means you need to use some type of latex barrier. With using condoms, a couple of things you want to avoid. Anything that's spermicide or warming gels or anything that's flavored, any added stuff. If there's lubricant, it should be water-based. Also, avoid things that are ridged or really super tight condoms. You want something that's kind of loose fitting. Of course, not to the point where it's going to fall off, but something that's gives you a little bit more room. Not something that's super tight because it's not going to feel good. No swimming until it's completely healed. Also, keep pets away from it. Don't let them sleep in the bed with you. Keep your bedding clean or anything that may come in contact with it until it's clean or until it's healed, including clothing, of course. Avoid playing with the piercing or excessive movement. Sex, when comfortable, gentle at first. If it hurts to do something, try something else. And like I said earlier, if you're using any type of lubricant, it needs to be water-based and without anything else in it. Do not sleep on the piercing. Make sure you're sleeping on your side or your back. I don't care how good it feels. That constant movement while you're sleeping will cause issues. The more that jewelry moves around and the more it gets jostled, the longer your healing is going to be and the more likely you are to have issues. Even though this piercing is not really prone and does pretty good with trauma, it's always best to avoid it while we're creating that healing tissue. First 3 to 5 days, you're going to see redness, discolorization. Like I said, you can see bleeding. In some cases, worst case scenario, up to a week. It really varies from person to person. Usually, most people, after about the first night, it's done. The pad, I usually suggest wearing for a week, just basically because it does add some additional comfort, padding, and it cuts down the amount of moisture that's in the area, which is going to cut down the amount of bacteria, which reduces the likelihood of infection when it's most acceptable to infection. Now, let's talk about jewelry. First off, the jewelry should be left in at all times. Removing the jewelry for any extended period of time is probably going to cause the piercing to close. Body piercing jewelry is designed to be in the body for a long period of time. Once it's in there, there's really no reason to remove it, to clean it, or anything like that. Now, if the piercing jewelry is excessively loose when you are erect, because things change, you know this if you have one of these or have been around them, you may want to downsize to a slightly shorter piece of jewelry, especially if it begins getting caught on things or causing issues or discomfort, especially with your partner. If your partner is noticing discomfort, maybe switching out to smaller balls or ends is going to be a little bit more comfortable for them. Kind of experiment, see what works best for you. When downsizing, you should measure yourself when you're erect and add roughly a 1/16 to an 1/18 of an inch in the length. And the reason being is you always want a little bit of room. You don't want it super tight because that's going to cause discomfort and possibly cause problems even in a healed piercing, including tearing. Of course, avoid jewelry that has sharp edges, points, things dangling off of it, or might get caught on absolutely everything and hurt when it comes in contact with that very sensitive tissue we have in that part of our body. You would think that was a given, but it isn't always. One common thing that I totally forgot to put on here is to put Frenum rings. And what these are is generally a ring that wraps all the way around the shaft of the penis and then connects into the barbell. I really don't think these are a good idea for long-term wear, maybe for short-term wear, special occasion kind of things. But for day-to-day wear, it's usually best to stick with just the barbells. I've also had clients that have worn large diameter rings all the way around. The only problem I have with this is if it's too tight, it can cut off the blood circulation, which could put you in a situation where if you can't get the jewelry off, I guess, you're going to end up in the emergency room. So always take that into account that it has to be properly sized. Another thing is do not wear anything made of sterling in your genital piercings or area. And that's one of the problems I have with the bands, the Frenum bands and etc., or Frenum loops or whatever they call them. A lot of times they're made of sterling. Problem with it is that silver, as it erodes, can leak out silver salts. Your body then absorbs it because of mucous membrane, and it can lead to silver poisoning, which is a permanent discolorization of the area of wherever that jewelry's been in contact. I don't advise wearing anything made of sterling or silver in your genitals at all. Now let's talk a little bit about living with the piercing. Jewelry should be left in at all times, of course. Whenever switching partners, of course, practice safe sex. Do check the balls tightness or ends tightness on a regular basis. I'm going to mention a little bit about chastity because it's come up in the past. There are some devices out there that are made for the jewelry to fit into that are used as like a lock or something. The main issue I have with a majority of this is the amount of pressure that it puts on the piercing itself. It can cause damage to the piercing and cause problems. So you should always understand that before even trying this. The other thing with it is that you never know what these materials are actually made out of because most of it is made in Asia and third world countries. God only knows what the material is. There is usually not any type of certification, third party or otherwise, of what material that's actually made out of, or that if it is biocompatible. So always understand it, that this may cause problems in a lot of different directions, including allergic reactions. Other than that, like I said, putting a lot of pressure on the piercing can cause issues. Putting large diameter rings in it can cause the same issues. I don't really advise it, or attaching it to other piercings, just so you know. Lastly, let's talk a little bit about abandoning the piercing. If it's during the healing process, it will probably close fairly quickly. You should keep an eye on it. You should practice safe sex and treat it like an open wound, like you would any other part of your body, until it is completely closed. If you notice any problems or issues with it, consult your doctor. If the piercing has been in there for a long period of time and it's healed, it will slowly begin to close. First off, closing in the center and then slowly filling outward. It may often look like it is wide open, but reality is that it's sealed in the center. Sometimes these will produce what's called sebums, sebum. And it's a waxy oil, has the consistency of cottage cheese, or not cottage cheese, cream cheese, the other cheese that's white. Is cottage cheese really cheese? I've always wondered that. Anyway, has a very distinct odor to it. Sometimes if you squeeze the piercing, this will come out. That's not a sign of infection. Basically, it's completely normal. Don't worry about it. Just clean it off and it'll be fine. Well, that's all I have to say about Frenum piercings today. If you have any questions or anything to add, maybe your experience with this particular piercing, feel free to leave a comment. Till next time, here's hoping all your piercings heal with ease and without a single issue. And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, I hope to see you for your body piercing needs in the future. Have a good day, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video. Maybe one of these.